Good evening. This is CTV News for Wednesday, August 8th. I'm Denise Douglas.
And I'm Patricia Vallone. Thank you for joining us tonight. Well, this weekend will mark the one-year anniversary of a violent escapade there in Charlottesville, Virginia. Many of the same right-wing groups are planning once again to rally on Saturday and Sunday, this time in Washington, D.C. But many counter-protesters are expected to descend on the nation's capital as well, including faith-based groups such as the Friends Committee on National Legislation.
I'm actually joining a group of Quakers who will be in silent reflection during the rally, and we believe that love is the way that we are going to make a difference in this world. We believe in loving thy neighbor, and we hope that this message of love will help us push back against any negative narratives that are going, especially in this white supremacist rally that's happening right now. The reason why I'm going to the rally is because I feel compelled to love and to lead with love in everything we do. And so that means that standing there and hoping that creating that space for love in that rally is a place that some people can feel receptive to that messaging.
Now, there will be a staging area for churches and other faith-based groups that will take place at 1313 New York Avenue in Northwest D.C. The area will be used as a safe haven and hospitality center and will include an area to charge cell phones.
A very disturbing story coming out of Riverdale Park, and police need your help in catching the suspect. A man broke into an apartment in the 5000 block of Jefferson Street. According to the mother, he touched her young daughter on her leg. She and her two children were asleep, but she woke up in time and confronted the man. We asked a number of residents about the incident, and they expressed concern. The suspect is being described as approximately 5 feet, 11 inches tall, with a thin build. For more information, you are asked to call 301-772-4908 if you know anything about this incident. One of Maryland's neighboring states admits it's doing its part, and it isn't doing its part in reducing pollution from flowing into the Chesapeake Bay. The Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection made that admission at yesterday's annual meeting of the Chesapeake Executive Council. The group, which includes 6 states, is working on a plan to restore the bay by 2025. Tensions rose to a head following recent flooding that washed tons of debris and trash from the Susquehanna into the bay.
Last few weeks, Maryland has had to deal with the devastation caused by heavy rain and flooding during a major storm event. The majority of all the sediment in the bay flows directly into the Chesapeake Bay from the upstream watershed originating in Pennsylvania and New York. We've been calling on our upstream partners to do their fair share to keep our waterways clean and safe. The past few weeks, have really made it more clear than ever that we need to step up and take on more responsibility for the debris and the trash and the pollution in the Susquehanna, which is pouring into the bay, our rivers, streams, and creeks.
To that end, the Pennsylvania EPA has promised to develop a plan that would sharply reduce the amount of trash and debris running into the bay.
Well, 2 Maryland lawmakers called on the federal government to review companies deeply involved in the state's election infrastructure. The companies are AltPoint Capital, a venture fund with ties to a wealthy Russian investor, and ByteGrid, a data company that hosts the state's election systems. Senators Ben Cardin and Chris Van Hollen say access to the infrastructure could provide a foreign government with intelligence information or be used for other purposes that are against U.S. interests. Now, they're asking for remedies if the administration determines the relationship poses a threat to national security. Well, it has been 20 years since she lost her brother and father in an attack on the U.S. Embassy in Nairobi. Yesterday marked the anniversary of that tragedy that was carried out by al-Qaeda.
Simultaneously to that attack, an embassy in Dar es Salaam was attacked. More than 200 local residents and 12 Americans in all were killed. Edith Bartley is here to talk about how that incident changed her family's life and how she and others have been seeking justice in all this. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Taking time out. Kind of let's start out with, how is your family doing and how have you all been able to cope with the tragedy over these years?
You keep going on. You know, I think none of us know how how much we have such human resilience until you are faced with something that you didn't anticipate. And for me, I focused on carrying on the legacy of my father and brother and ensuring that diplomats and other American embassy personnel around the globe are never forgotten. We often think of our military serving on the front lines, but in reality, American diplomats, along with CIA, other intelligence agency personnel, other American embassy personnel, are in harm's way every day, serving American interest globally. And we've got to remember those 12 Americans who were brought home in body bags as a result of an al-Qaeda attack that was really a precursor to 9/11. We have to stand vigilant as a country to not forget and to hold countries of state-sponsored terrorism accountable.
I happen to have been there at the service for your brother and your father. I was covering it here for CTV News, and it's kind of a shock when I think back that it was 20 years ago. At that time, there were so many warm tributes, and it was such an unusual case because it was a father and a brother in one location. Tell me a little bit about some of those memories.
Oh, it was, I was very much grieving and in shock at the time, but I do clearly remember people who worked with my father, who served with him abroad, particularly Congressman Benny Thompson from Mississippi, who had known my father since the 70s and who had hosted him as a Pearson Fellow on Capitol Hill in his office here in Washington, D.C. And friends that he's known for a long time just really talked about how much they remember him serving or being there when they came to a country to welcome them when they were there. My father was the Consul General. He was a 27-year career American diplomat, had served in our Peace Corps right after college, and so was really a dedicated public servant and loved his work, was a true diplomat. He was a people person, and I think that's what people really reflected on and remembered, and that comes across to me. And my 20 years of walking the halls of Congress for American diplomats, families of American diplomats and intelligence agencies, I've certainly run into many members of Congress, staff, other people who talk warmly in a positive way about having worked with my father or coming across when they had a problem with an American constituent and having to reach out to the Consul General and having a positive experience. And so I'll just try to keep that legacy going.
Absolutely. And for people who may have forgotten their names, Julian Bartley Sr. and your brother was Julian J. Bartley Jr. Your brother was an intern there at the Embassy of Nairobi. Now, we talked a little bit on the phone earlier and about the fact that families had been seeking compensation. Kind of just give us a sense of where you are with that whole issue and what you have done to try to make a difference and try to ensure that this doesn't happen again.
Sure. So my focus has been really on accountability and keeping the legacy of the family members alive. When this happened, there was nothing on the books to address a special circumstance like this. State Department had not encountered something like this since 1979 when our embassy in Iran was taken over by hostages. And then we had 83 and 84, our American embassy in Beirut, and then the annex had been attacked. And so what I was able to get into law working with then Senator Barbara Mikulski before she left office. I got 3 bills through the House, always a problem in the Senate. And then she worked with Senator Roy Blunt of Missouri to get things over the line. It was very bipartisan and created new benefits for families of American diplomats and intelligence personnel. In addition, and as well as our foreign service nationals who support our American personnel at embassies all across the globe. In addition to that, our families sued Iran for violating U.S. for their contribution to those bombings, and we were able to get through Congress, last Congress, the the American Victims of State-Sponsored Terrorism Act into law, and essentially that provides penalty money when our government is actually able to sue an entity for violating U.S. sanctions against Iran, and use a portion of that money goes into the fund for families who actually have a judgment against Iran, so they can begin to collect on some of those judgments. Many times families are suing a state sponsor of terrorism receive a judgment or, but never see any of those funds. And so this fund will be open for 10 years. It helps not only the American embassy bombings in East Africa, but our Beirut families as well. And many of them have started to die off.
Well, we have about 30 seconds, but very briefly, what do you think the federal government needs to do for victims at this point?
We need to keep them focused at the forefront of our minds. We often talk about 9/11. We stand behind our 9/11 families. Al-Qaeda and others who want to do harm to Americans across the globe are not going away, and we want to ensure that we support our diplomats, our State Department budget, and the families who are supporting their loved ones serving on the front lines every day. And so we need to do more of that, and we're proud to see the State Department acknowledge the 20th anniversary. The Deputy Secretary is very committed to American families of diplomats as well. Deputy Secretary Sullivan.
Sure.
Thank you so
Edith
much.
Bartley, thank you so much for your words and your information.